said to be one of the most haunted buildings in Great Britain, if not the world. A place that has witnessed it all, from treason, murder and execution, to lost love, heartbreak and misery. The Tower of London is drenched in dark history and ghosts who met grisly ends at the hands of powerful, greedy men and women. And when I say the place is dripping in ghosts, I seriously mean it. Built by William the Conqueror in the 11th century, the Tower of London has been many things. Not only does it play a huge role in English history, it has been a royal palace, treasury, public records office, an armoury, and home to the crown jewels. But like many fortresses, it certainly wasn't all grand feasts and dances. This place has seen some of the grisliest scenes in history. During the 15th century, it became a prison, with Elizabeth I becoming its most prominent guest. Surprisingly, the tower itself has only seen 7 people executed there, but Tower Hill, on the castle grounds, has seen a whopping 112 executions. The Tower of London had 3 main methods of torture. The first was the manacles. One prisoner described this in detail, and these are his words.
They put my wrists into iron gauntlets and ordered me to climb the 2 or 3 wicker steps. My arms were then lifted up and an iron bar was passed through the rings of one gauntlet, then through the staple rings of the second gauntlet. This done, they fastened the bar with a pin to prevent it slipping, and then, removing the wicker steps, they left me hanging by my hands and arms fastened above my head.
You can imagine how painful that was. The second method was the rack, where a prisoner would be tied at the wrists and ankles and stretched bit by bit. A woman called Anne Askew was unable to walk after this horrific torture and had to be carried to her execution. They wanted her to reveal the names of Protestant sympathisers, and her own words discovered in a diary are harrowing. Because I lay still and did not cry, my Lord Chancellor and Master Rich took pains to rack me with their own hands till I was nigh dead. Lastly, we have the scavenger's daughter. This method was the opposite to the rack and would compress and contort the victim. 2 versions are said to exist. The replica in the Wakefield Tower would hold a body tight in a kneeling down position, and in a short space of time the prisoner would feel extreme pain and have blood filling their lungs. The other version in the Spanish armories of the White Tower is an elaborate set of handcuffs which also grasps the neck and ankles, twisting the body into an excruciating position. So with severe torture practices, the murder of 2 young princes, and the execution of 3 English queens, including Anne Boleyn, a sense of darkness and foreboding permeates the area. There are way too many ghosts at the Tower of London to be able to tell all their stories today, but here are just a few, starting with King Henry VI, who died in 1471. Now, Henry VI had a rather crazy time while king, fighting with King Edward IV over who should have the throne and other family matters. He was thrown into the tower, but eventually freed by his supporters when Edward took refuge with his family in St. Peter's Sanctuary within Westminster Abbey. But in 1471, Edward returned, and not only defeated him, but also killed his teenage son and heir to the throne. Now, heartbroken, Henry found himself once again inside the tower. But then terrible news came about that he had died suddenly, and people grew suspicious that it might have been murder. You see, it's believed that men, under the instruction of the Duke of Gloucester, the brother of Edward, had snuck into the Wakefield Tower around midnight while Henry was praying and killed him. Due to cover-ups at the time, none of this can be proven, but his ghost has been seen in the tower around the stroke of midnight, praying quietly before disappearing. Now, murder is horrible no matter who it is, but when it comes to killing children, well, that kind of really sours my stomach. You see, one of the most cruel murders that occurred in the Tower of London was that of the 2 princes named Edward and Richard. They were the sons of King Edward IV and Elizabeth Woodville. When Edward died in 1483, his brother, the Duke of Gloucester, yes, him again, who would later become King Richard III, became Lord Protector of the new king, who at the time was only 12 years old. But the Duke of Gloucester coveted the throne and decided to throw the young king and his 9-year-old brother into the tower under the ruse that it was all for their own protection. At first things seemed fine as they would play together happily on the green, but this all changed when suddenly they disappeared, never to be seen alive again. But one thing we can be sure of is that their uncle was slap bang in the middle of it all. You see, he went about making vicious rumours saying that the boys were illegitimate and not the rightful heirs, and without their mother close by to support them as she was taking sanctuary in Westminster Abbey, the young children became very afraid. It's thought that the boys might have been smothered, but again, we can't really know. One thing is for certain, the bones of 2 children were discovered beneath a staircase in the Tower of London, assumed to be the final resting place of the young princes. Their ghosts have been seen many times over the years, often reenacting their final moments on Earth. They are seen in the White Tower, drifting between rooms and melting into the walls, looking afraid and glancing over their shoulders. Described as wearing nightgowns and holding hands or clutching each other, it seems that they knew what their fate would be, and their terror is clearly visible. Now, as I said earlier, many of the deaths that happened inside the tower were for personal gain, and never was a tale more tragic or creepy than that of Anne Boleyn, the second wife of King Henry VIII. After seducing the young lady over several years and eventually marrying her, Anne did the unthinkable and gave birth to a little girl, who eventually became Queen Elizabeth I. This wasn't good enough for Henry, as he wanted a son to carry on his legacy and become king after him. So after failed pregnancies, which he seemed to take as an omen, his wandering eyes drifted to other possibilities. While she was recovering from another miscarriage, Henry set about seducing Jane Seymour, one of Anne's maids of honour, and thinking that Anne had nothing left to offer him but disappointment, set about getting rid of her. Henry declared that he had been seduced into marriage by ways of deception or spells. And along with this crazy accusation, he started to rip her character apart to completely take away all blame from himself. He accused her of adultery, incest with her own brother, as well as high treason for the act of trying to kill him, none of which was true. She was taken by barge along the River Thames to the Tower of London through the infamous Traitor's Gate. On the date of her execution, May 19th, 1536, she held herself together and addressed the crowd who eagerly were awaiting her death. In her speech, she spoke kindly of her husband and didn't accuse him of any wrongdoing, finishing with these final words: "And if any person will meddle of my cause, I require them to judge the best, and thus I take my leave of the world and of you all, and I heartily desire you to pray for me. O Lord, have mercy on me. To God I commend my soul." Anne was killed with one swift strike of a blade, cutting her head clean off. But you might wonder why she didn't criticise her horrible husband and his actions. Well, it's believed she was doing her best as a final act to protect her only daughter, Elizabeth. In death, though, she's not been restful. You see, her headless ghost has been seen by many people over the years, inside the buildings and on the Tower Green. In 1864, one terrified soldier came across her ghost and was so alarmed he attacked it with a bayonet. Obviously, this didn't do anything but strike the door behind her, but the poor guy fainted on the spot. On another occasion, a soldier saw the flickering light of a candle coming from the closed chapel. Deciding to investigate, he climbed up to get a better look from a window, but couldn't believe what he saw. He could see a procession of knights in armour, as well as lords and ladies. In the front of them all was a small, slight woman, whom he later discovered to be Anne Boleyn. For several minutes this scene played out before him, until the lights and spirits slowly faded away. Henry VIII certainly was a man who liked to get his own way. He came across as selfish, with no care for who he hurt in the process. He is best known for having 6 wives and his efforts to annul his first marriage to Catherine of Aragon. Along with falling out and being excommunicated by Pope Paul III, Henry went about sanctioning the destruction of shrines to saints and monasteries. And while religion and politics were an issue for him, one thing he loved was women, often having mistresses as well as his many wives. He was said to be tender with his many ladies, referring to them as sweetheart, and apparently being a good lover. Just give me a moment while I vomit at that thought. But while he might have been adoring while he loved them, he was brutal when he didn't. If you managed to get out of the relationship alive, you would still be left feeling completely abandoned. Like I said, he was ruthless when he decided he'd had enough. And a man so cold deserves a fitting end, you might say. Well, you won't be disappointed, as he certainly had a long and drawn-out decline in health. You see, Henry had a jousting accident in 1536 where he received a leg wound, and seems to be the start of when things began to go downhill for him. It started with severe mood swings, which resulted in drastic change in his personality and temperament. After a while he became obese and had to be moved about with the help of mechanical devices, as well as suffering from gout and pus-filled boils that were excruciatingly painful. But it doesn't end there. Many believe he might have had syphilis, though most historians believe this could be untrue. What is thought to be accurate is that he not only suffered from scurvy, but McLeod syndrome. This is a neurological disorder that occurs in boys and men, said to affect movement in many areas of the body and create abnormal, star-shaped red blood cells. With all his many ailments, the obesity hastened the arrival of his death, which occurred on January 28th, 1547, at the age of 55, at the Palace of Whitehall. He got his wish too, and he was buried next to his beloved Jane. But just like in life, he certainly gets about in death. His spirit has been witnessed at Hampton Court, as well as the Tower of London. A CCTV image was captured of him in 2003 by security staff reviewing footage. On the first day, the doors at the property swung open with such force it shocked those who witnessed it. But on the second day, things got a lot darker when the doors did the same thing again, but the person responsible this time was visible. The ghostly figure of a large man could be seen, believed to be Henry, with many people naming the spirit Skeletor. The doors swung open one final time, but have since been quiet, which is more than can be said for the spirit seen at the tower. You see, in the armoury at the Tower of London, there are pieces of Henry's armour on display for guests to see. Side rant. Just a warning, if you ever decide to go, you might be shocked at how he had himself displayed in his finery. His armour is shockingly enlarged in the groin area. I mean, it screams small man syndrome. Anyway, I digress. It is believed that Henry's armour is possessed either by him or a malevolent spirit. Many guards while patrolling at night and guests over the years have reported terrible sensations, things like chills running down their spine, a sense of dread, and feeling like they're being crushed alive. It has been described as a force that seems to jump at you from the ceiling, wrapping itself around your chest and squeezing, while others feel hands strangling them. One poor guard even reported an entity attacking him wearing a visible cloak. As he fought to get away, he described the cloak wrapping around his throat and getting tighter and tighter. Luckily, the poor guy managed to escape, but not before his attacker had left visible red marks around his neck. All these attacks happen near Henry's armour, and whenever the armour is moved, so does the location of the attacks. Could it be something attached to his old belongings? Or could it be Henry himself, as when he died, he was more aggressive due to a head injury? What do you think? Evil entity or Henry? Lastly, we finish on the sad tale of a group of men wanting to make a difference and stand up to the king and his council. Remember, the 5th of November, gunpowder, treason and plot are words of a children's nursery rhyme in Britain, often chanted as fireworks flying, bonfires lit, burning a human effigy known as the Guy. It may seem quite gruesome, and it is, I guess, but his story is one of tragedy that left him haunting the White Tower dungeons forevermore. Born in York in 1570, Guy Fawkes, also known as Guido Fawkes, became involved with a group of English Catholics led by Robert Catesby. Together, their plan was to blow up the House of Lords, killing the Protestant King James I and having Elizabeth take his place. But things didn't go as planned, and Fawkes was captured in the early hours of November 5th. Now the king wanted answers, and one of those was who were his comrades that got away. Fawkes refused even when he was tortured on the rack. No matter how brave he was though, every person has their breaking point, and finally he gave his friends up. The Attorney General, Sir Edward Coke, said that each man would be drawn backwards to his death by a horse with head near the ground. Worse still, their genitals would be cut off and burnt before their eyes, as well as hearts being removed. But it didn't stop there, as after this they would be decapitated, dismembered, and their bodies displayed so that birds could peck at them. So on January 31st, 1606, Fawkes and his colleagues named Thomas Wintour, Ambrose Rookwood and Robert Keyes were dragged from the tower and taken to the Old Palace Yard at Westminster. When it was Fawkes' turn to be executed, he was so weak from all the torture that the hangman had to aid him up the steps to the noose. But almost like he wanted to avoid the torture his friends had endured, he jumped off the platform when the noose was around his neck, making sure that his neck broke. Sadly though, his ghost is said to scream in pain as he is forever tortured in the White Tower dungeons, with guests to this area feeling a deep sense of sadness and anguish. I have visited the tower a couple of times, the last being 2018. Though I never saw a ghost, I can say that I felt something dark residing there. You can walk around the torture rooms and dungeon areas and feel the atmosphere. It gets under your skin. As you enter the old prison rooms, the scent of urine can be detected, almost as if it is seeped into the very foundation of the stonework. But the creepiest part for me was not only the memorial area where Anne Boleyn is said to have been executed, but the rooms where men and women had carved their messages of fear and despair into the brick. You can read their words and feel their terror as they knew what was to come. It really is worth a visit and will truly bring home to you the horrors that we are capable of inflicting on each other in a world that, let's face it, can be crappy enough on its own. So dissectors, stay safe out there.